The Ferrari 2024 Challenger has undergone a complete redesign for the F1 season, with 95% of its components having been updated for the season. And in this video, we're going to be going over all of these changes that have reportedly been made on the SF-24, starting from front to rear, as we have a huge amount to go over, so sit back and relax as we dive into these changes. Starting at the front of the car, a lot of emphasis has been reportedly placed on designing an entirely new front wing concept, much in line of that with the one used on the RB19 to such good effect. One of the main weaknesses on the cars produced at Maranello for years now have always been their front end, which is something that Charles Leclerc in particular struggles with quite a bit. So to try and rectify these issues, the team have made changes to the front wing flaps to resemble those on the Red Bull a lot more, while retaining the nose design from the SF-23. The main purpose of the change in flap design is all about the outwash that it will help to create. Their front suspension is another area going on a slight alteration, but not in terms of from pushrod to pull rod, but rather in the design of each of the suspension arms themselves. These changes are being made while keeping in mind those that are happening on the front ring and nose of the SF-24, as I've just discussed. The main goals are twofold. One, to help the newly formed aerodynamic structures and platforms, and hopefully also to have a better aero balance created by said front ring changes. And then secondly, it's also to have an eye on the mechanical side of things. And I'm talking about their aim to increase their level of anti-dive on the SF-24. But I want to know your guys' opinions. Do you believe all of these rumours regarding the changes being made to the SF-24? Let me know in the comments down below. One of the weak points on the SF-23 was their front end, something that both Charles and Carlos struggled with throughout the 23 season. The changes to the positioning of the suspension arms are aimed at helping to alleviate some of those problems, with them becoming more inclined than their predecessors. Their main struggles came whenever at a track which had what you'd call long radius corners. So think of circuits like Hungary and Japan in particular, those really long right-handers or left-handers that are continuous. And this is one area they could not help alleviate fully, even with updates throughout the season. The second aim around improving the anti-dive is one that comes with its own set of difficulties, namely with regards to the sensitivity of the drivers when braking. Because the whole point of anti-dive is that by altering the front suspension, it forces the resulting pressure from braking to pass through the control arms and suspension linkage rather than through the coilovers or struts. But making these changes, they can have consequences that they don't want to actually occur, particularly when it comes to their braking performance, which is something Carlos Sainz mentioned at the season end. We have to sacrifice something to improve other areas, but hopefully it's not in this particular area that this happens, which was one of the very few positives in regards to the SF-23's front end. Up next, another area undergoing changes would be the side pods as well as the chassis. After having ditched their unique bathtub concept, which they unveiled at the beginning of the 2022 season and continued with in the beginning of the 23 season, Ferrari decided to switch to a more traditional style design, first introduced at the Spanish Grand Prix. This new concept was much more in line with that of Red Bull's, and for 2024, Ferrari will be staying the course with that design instead of following the likes of Aston Martin or McLaren in introducing their own version of the water slide concept. Nonetheless, some very important alterations through changes made to the chassis will help them even further in following Red Bull's downwash ramp style concept. The first of these major changes that will occur will be to the low assist positioning on the SF-24, with that very positioning hindering what they could achieve with the SF-23 when they switched concept designs. And this is all because the chassis was originally designed around their bathtub style solution, and so they couldn't change the chassis and move the assist fairings as it's too much of a burden on the revenue they can use throughout the season as well as resources. This also limited them in the amount of undercut they could create with that particular Barcelona update, and the assist fairing, or rather the low assist fairing, was very visible on their newly revised side pod for all to see. Now, with the rearrangement of the assist fairings on this SF-24, they will have the possibilities to create a much more impactful undercut, as well as finally introducing the downwash ramps on the side pod inlets seen on the RB19, which is a trend that most teams have adopted over the last 2 seasons. Just how extreme will they go in this area of development? Only time will tell. And finally, we come back to the engine cover and Coke bottle region, which is expected to be heavily revised. Once again, we're going to sound like a broken record here, but once again, following concepts introduced by Adrian Newey on the last 2 Red Bull cars. For the most part, as we've seen, Ferrari have been on their very own unique design concept for the first 2 seasons of these ground effect rules, and as such have had a drastically different looking car than those of the rest of the grid, and the engine cover is no different. But this will change for 2024, with the team aligning itself with the much larger and open bodywork at the rear, and of course through the Coke bottle region, which we see on the RB19. The engine cover will become much more elongated, and the Coke bottle portion, which sits directly in front of the rear ring, will be widened and opened up. The aim is to not only, of course, dispose of the heat coming from the internals, which as well will mean less openings along their side pods for the SF-24, but also because it will help to guide the air over the rear ring and of course the beam ring, which is something that Red Bull have pioneered since the beginning of the ground effect era. Right guys, that's the video. Hope you've all enjoyed it. If you have, leave a like and leave comments down below, and I'll catch you all in another Formula 1 video.